Button's Daughter, Chapter 1, New Beginnings. The sun shined its rays across the land. No dark clouds sat in the sky. The birds sang their lullabies, and the animals of the ever-free forest lived free and wild. Mighty dark blue owls with electricity escaping their helix-style tails sat comfortably in their little homes. Holes in the trunks of trees. Wolves as white as milk walked, leaving a trail of ice. The ice would disappear in a matter of seconds when it touched the ground. Button Mash, on the other hand, watched such creatures from a distance, sitting very high on an oak tree. A green cloak covered the stallion's body, making sure he fit in with the vegetation of the forest, which wasn't too hard. He was on the thick, lavish side of the forest, grass as green as Maniac's hair. The plants thrived, oak titans resting themselves so calmly on the floor, and the flowers set elegantly, each one with their own twists and patterns of color. In one of the bushes, Button actually saw a bouquet of black roses. He smiled as a phoenix made from fire nestled himself closer to its children. Small pockets of fire cheering happily to see their mother coming home. It was a marvel to the stallion how creatures from literal fire could breathe life and not burn down anything. Their nest was also made from fire, which was hanging down from a normal tree. How is it such fire cannot even cause a scorch mark? A work of nature and truly a display of her strength. Suddenly, deep within the forest, the stallion heard crying. It wasn't the type of crying you hear when you hear people running away from a monster. In fact, the crying sounded like it wasn't coming from an adult at all. It sounded like the crying of a child. However, it didn't take Button long to react. He jumped off the branch as he was sitting on and started plummeting to the ground. As he was about to hit the ground, he threw a white crystal shard at the floor. It didn't take more than a second for the shard to turn into a bubble, catching the stallion. Button slid off the white bubble and ran towards the crying. He knew where it was coming from, and it scared him. The crying was coming from the dark side of the forest, where monsters and things lived. Plants there had jaws that could swallow you whole in one bite, insects that could clear the meat from your bones in seconds. The dark side of the forest is where horrors of Equestria lived, where fools and heroes traveled to, and are never heard from again. The deepest an equestrian creature had ever traveled through and returned from the dark forest was but a few feet past its entrance. The earth pony prayed for whatever was crying had some sort of protection. Rushing through the field of trees, Button finally reached the threshold of the dark forest. You could see and hear the difference between the light side and the dark side of the forest. The trees of the dark side had twisted black trunks. Some trees looked deformed, like the way they were twisting and how they were sprouting wasn't natural, almost if someone was growing them like that. The flowers there were withered and the grass had sharp, jagged thorns. What would be probably the worst part of it all was the fact it was so quiet. You could hear your own heartbeat in the forest, knowing that something could be watching you and pounce on you at any moment, not having a clue that it was watching you the whole time. The only barrier sitting in between the forest was a shallow river, knee-deep for Button. He fought with himself, but his debate ended when he heard the crying child scream. Without a moment's notice, Button sprang into action, galloping across the river. All he had with himself was a small batch of crystals, but for now, this was the only thing he will ever have, and this will be the only thing he will have if he's going to save the child. He entered the dark forest. The thorns made sure Button stayed on the open dirt road. If he tried to step on the thorn-filled grass, his hooves will be introduced to a couple of tiny sharp spears. So for now, he moved on the dirt road. The first thing Button noticed was the fact that the child stopped crying. It was just eerie silence that surrounded him. In the darkness, the Queen of the Night will watch over me. In the sun, Celestia will guide me. Button chanted this to himself silently, trying to ease his own nerves. The sweat on his brow started to gather. His eyes jolted at anything that moved. The child that was screaming was probably gone, he thought to himself. The baby wasn't crying anymore. Button took a few more steps. If the child was not crying, it must be gone. Dead by something. Or even if the child wasn't dead, how was he going to find it? He needs to listen to the crying noise to find the baby. Button turned around and was met by some pony, or at least it looked like one. It had no muscles of an earth pony, no wings of a pegasi, and no horns of a unicorn. Instead, it was just tall, standing only on its hind legs. Instead, it was tall and standing only on its hind legs, easily towering a pony. Its eyes were gone, just two eyeless sockets, no mouth, and it was so thin you could see its own rib cage. You could even call it lanky. Its mane was black as coal, but it had no tail. However, what made it terrifying wasn't its eyeless sockets. No, what caused Button's heart to jump to his throat was its two hands. They were black, razor-sharp nails. They were long and thin, long enough to coil one finger around an earth pony. For what felt like a minute, it just stood still, like a statue. Button did not know what to do. Suddenly, it tilted its head slightly. Button readied himself as much as he could, a hoof in his pouch of crystals. It lunged at Button. It was blazing fast. The monster had no problem closing the distance. But just before a deadly blow could be landed, Button threw a blue crystal, freezing the monster. For now. As much as Button wanted to, he couldn't sit there and stare at the monster. He had to leave. As the stallion was about to run from such a horrible place, he glanced into that thing's eyes. Two empty, soulless voids were what he saw, but now nothing stood in the stallion's way. Button could leave as he pleased. Just as he was about to take a step into the river and leave this place, he heard the child again, but it wasn't screaming or crying. Instead, it was just laughing. Button sighed as he followed the laughing trail. It led him to a pony baby, a foal. The foal had a dark blue coat and a milky white mane. No cutie mark. What in Celestia happened? All around the child there were dead monsters. A few of the dead monsters were those tall, lanky, eyeless monsters. Button didn't count all the bodies that were there and didn't check what kind of monster had died. He was here for the child and he just found her. What did you do? He said as he picked up the baby. The foal was playing with the butterfly and laughing as she playfully tried to catch it. The butterfly was almost teasing the filly, periodically landing on her muzzle just to escape her clutches in the last moment. Button noticed three more of those tall, lanky monsters appear from the forest. They were walking slowly to Button, but they stopped in their tracks and even backed off when the foal looked at them. Nevertheless, Button got what he came for and he wasn't going to spend a second longer at such a place. He bulleted for the exit, ran across the river, making a beeline straight for his house. He ran for his life. However, when he entered the light forest, he looked back. He saw those three lanky monsters standing on the edge of the dark forest. They watched him as he ran away. "Nope," Button said. "I'm not going to stand here and stare back at you three. Goodbye."